They banned a vanilla? And honestly, I'm all about it. Hey everybody, it's Espira, and we're back with another Battle Spirits Saga video. Today we're talking about the first ever ban list for Battle Spirits Saga, and to be honest, one that I'm very excited about. I think it's no surprise to anyone who's been following through with the channel or with the community discords and things like that, that I think the game has been in a place where unfortunately we're really over centralized over a few strategies and a few certain cards that have made it really tough to really be able to investigate or explore any other archetypes, any other ways to play at the very top echelon of competitive play. And especially as we're leading towards a pro tour, a format that looks heavily very similar to what we even had in set 1, except now you got like Axe Spider in white control shells, and you got the way that you have to play around kind of the Netherworld's minigame has lent it to be a very stagnant format. And even though set 3 fixes a lot of that, I'm a big proponent that you want your Pro Tour to be as exciting as possible, and thankfully for us, we actually did get an answer. So with that said, first we're going to look at exactly what has happened, and then thankfully they've actually made a producer message, so huge ups to the Bandai team for putting together the whole reasoning and structure. I love when ban lists are backed by explanations and reaching out to us, and it's this kind of communication that I am so happy for. So very glad to see that we're moving forward with that kind of open comms, and let's see specifically what has been hit. So to kick us off, and first thanks to Cosmic for making this image so I didn't have to bother, Ban and Limitless going live October 6th, which is the now adjusted date for the lore set. There was a 1-week delay for North America, and now with the release of that set, you will actually be getting this ban list. So first off, Volcanic Break Limit 1, which is nuts to me. Now, here's the thing. The big bans are obviously on the side here, of which it's Axe Spider and Netherworld Depths. And I think these are bans that everyone's been calling out for. Netherworld Depths because it centralizes the game, and Axe Spider because it's the core of like strategies and kind of, you know, your deck has to, so much of your deck has to be constructed to beat it that it kind of lends itself to really bad formats, because like, oh hey, now either like a third of my deck needs to deal with Axe Spider plus my entire sideboard needs to deal with Axe Spider. It just kind of really stagnated the format there. But now the red stuff, right? Overaptidon isn't that shocking and actually makes a lot of sense when we get into it. But then Volcanic Break, and this is kind of things where red needs to be powered down to account for the fact that it was still doing incredibly well in this format and would do even better without white having Axe Spider or without, you know, the draw engines and Netherworld as if it ever managed to stick. So Volcanic Break is just an answer card that deals with the lot. The 6k removal is actually way more overreaching than most removal we have eventually. I actually like it as an option, it existing. Especially since I think removal at the top end is really hard to come by at the moment. So Volcanic Break filled a great niche, and this definitely makes it worse. Now, for what it's worth, Volcanic Break was only being played at like usually maximum 3 of. It was down to like a 2 of slot now. 1 of means that now you need to play around it. I don't love limits, but honestly, a limit 1 of Volcanic Break isn't the biggest deal, but essentially what it does is it brings red down to the same level of every other color just to make sure that red isn't overrepresented. And that's actually why the Overaptidon ban makes a lot of sense. So in terms of Overaptidon need to get hit, because if we're hitting Axe Spider, then it lends itself to Terra not really having any checks in the format. And, you know, in the conversation, there was like, oh, well, Scorch Battlefield, because the turn 1 to 2 early draws that you're able to get off Scorch is kind of what allowed it to be degenerate, because now you can't outgas Terra, which was one of the strategies you should be doing against an aggro deck, is kind of dealing with their board and eventually they run out of a hand. But the fact that you could go Overaptidon into like drawing 2 cards, let's say with a Rain Needle, and then going into Wreck, because Overaptidon counts for 2 reductions when we're talking about Wrecks, it lends itself to these lines of play that are really hard to come back from. So, you know, discussions were Starblast Draw, but you can't hit Starblast Draw, because if you do, then purple's like a tier 0 deck, because the on-summons in purple are absolutely insane. But at the same time, if you hit Scorch, then that is negatively impacting like aggro strategies as a whole in red, or even other colors if they want to splash in red. So Overaptidon is like a very interesting hit, which honestly I had been joking about with some friends, like, yo, imagine if they hit some vanillas. But it makes a lot of sense in the context of the game flow of how the deck goes. And honestly, I think Pterosaur is probably just fine. Now your early game is just kind of stuff with like a Terra late game, or you're just like a mid-range Terra deck. So the deck's still probably viable. I've already been messing around with some builds, and it still looks like it's capable of doing some things. On the other end of the spectrum, you got Axe Spider. I think no surprise there. Axe Spider has been extremely annoying to have to deal with. Don't get me wrong, I've played with the deck and seen success with the deck because the card just does what it does, but it's one of those so over-centralizing cards. I don't think I need to go too deep into why I think they did this. Every white deck is an Axe deck. And then we got to a point where like the most successful decks were all variations on just running Axe Spider, and then you having to deal with it, which means every deck is running 3 to 4 Derms, 3 to 4 Jokers, you know, X amount of cards to be able to deal with it. And even then, the color that should have the most success with it, which is yellow, didn't even have a great matchup going into it because of the fact that it had armor purple. So now you got to like chain double exhaust nexus, or you have to like force the Expediter to block to make it a level 1 to then have to deal with it. It's very finicky and not elegant in any way, shape, or form. And then finally, depths. I mean, look, I made a whole video about why depths is oppressive. A bunch of people in the community have made videos about why it's not great. If anything, I actually highly recommend Ryan Miles' take on like why cards being too good and over centralizing kind of like limit the way people play games. I think it's a fantastic video, so I'll link that one actually over in the corner. But I'm not shocked by the ban. I think Overaptidon was like, okay, I get it. And Volcanic Break is kind of out of left field, but I understand that they're trying to keep the color in check and allowing you to be able to actually play some mid-game bodies without feeling absolutely terrible that they lose to Break. Also, this makes Elk better, and since the white decks lose Axe Spider, the ability to more reliably play Elk is probably pretty significant. And honestly, probably one of the biggest reasons why they hit Break. Moving on from actually just the overall, we can actually go into the designer's notes. So here, big shout out again to the Battle Spirits team. I love this kind of open communication, and let's just go through it. So we are greetings, summoners. We have been thrilled to see the enthusiasm for Battle Spirits Saga and to watch players innovate and explore the competitive landscape we strive for. We would like to share an important announcement with you about changes to the legal card pool in anticipation for BSSO3 Aquatic Invaders. For what it's worth, I do think things like hitting Pterosaur wasn't as necessary going into set 3, but the fact that this impacts the Pro Tour is probably why this like timeline has been pushed forward, which I'm a big fan for. I don't want kind of like the format of the PT to be a snoozer just because we don't want to implement the ban list early. I do think things like Floodstream deal with Pterosaur incredibly well going into the next format, but to have kind of like this in-between ban list that deals with those kinds of things early is something I welcome. In an effort to keep a fresh gameplay environment and facilitate a diverse competitive metagame, Battle Spirits Saga will be introducing a ban and limited card list to the competitive format. Look, I know some people are complaining like, oh, it's been set 2, but to be fair, I don't know of like a single game that hasn't gone its first 3 sets without banning something. So the game will be fine. Generally, any updates to the ban and limited card list will be announced prior to release of the new booster pack release and go into effect for premier events at the time of the set release. Cards on the ban list cannot be played in decks in competitive events. By competitive events, they just mean like all tournaments. Like if your locals for some reason decides to not ban them, that's up to your locals. You guys figure out. But generally, every tournament outside of like your kitchen table, these are banned in. And decks cannot contain more than the specified number of copies of cards for the limited list. We may consider reintroducing cards on a banned limited list at a later date. Very welcome. Big fan of bringing cards back in when they make more sense. If their inclusion will provide a richer competitive landscape. Big fan. I love the fact that we're okay with bringing cards back. So, limited to 1, Volcanic Break. In red strategies like Pterosaur, Volcanic Break has proved to be an extremely effective flash effect for destroying 5 to 6 cost spirits in aggressive decks for other colors, limiting the opportunity for counterattacks. Although there are various other aggressive deck archetypes in colors other than red, this card has been a major component in preventing them from being used effectively. By adding this card to the limited card list, we aim to increase diversity in kinds of aggressive decks that can be played in an upcoming and future metagame. I kind of get it. It's overarching. 6K deals with like a lot. And especially in like a color that doesn't care about having its soul core very often, unless you're playing like a Star Dragon build. So it's a little bit sad that like our removal for top end stuff is a little bit weaker because right now, especially going to set 3, we have so much early game removal. But at the end of the day, if late game removal is effectively forcing your opponent into combat, then that's fine. I'm okay with working through that. We'll see what comes with set 3. Banned cards. Overaptidon. To manage the power level of Pterosaurs while keeping the archetype viable, we are adding Overaptidon to the ban list. Many decks can struggle with the early game pressure of Overaptidon, followed by Jurassic King Gigano Rex, on top of having Scorch Battlefield, which allowed you to draw 2 to 3 cards before even getting there. We have deemed this additional measure necessary to offset other changes that heavily impact control-based strategies. Totally agree. I think keeping Pterosaurs on some level of check, especially since it's been best deck in format since like launch, big deal, big fan. Netherworld Depths. Oh my god, Netherworld Depths. About time. In the current competitive landscape, this card has become a mainstay in many strategies. Most purple archetypes, white decks designed to stop many attacks, and green and yellow decks, so every color except red at this point, that generate cores quickly. We have observed play patterns revolving around an early resolution of Netherworld Depths to be non-interactive and undesirable because naturally once Depths hits, your opponent either has the Burning Force or they stop playing the game, and that's just not fun for anybody. Therefore, we have chosen to add it to the banned card list to improve gameplay experience and deck building diversity. Axe Spider. This card has proven to be an over-centralizing cornerstone of control-heavy white strategies. Literally, you can't build a white deck without Axe Spider, unless you're doing white aggro. The viability of many archetypes seems to be determined by their ability to address the card in tandem with spells like Suppression and Infinity Shield. If you're not running Joker, if you're not running Derm, if you're not running X amount of million things to be able to deal with Axe, you ain't winning the game. Besides the strength of this combination limiting card diversity among white strategies, this tactic has also contributed to games taking longer to complete than we had anticipated. We aim to alleviate both issues through adding this card to the banned card list. I agree. Games not going to time is pretty relevant, especially since Battle Spirits is supposed to be like a high-powered game. I do believe, don't get me wrong, I like long games when they need to be, but games have been getting to a point where time decided most things, which is no fun for anybody. While we will generally be updating the banned and limited card list with the release of new booster pack products, we will be implementing these changes starting October 6th to align with the updated release of Ancient Heroes lore set. These adjustments will be in effect for the Pro Tour. Next time summoners are notified of additional regulations to the card pool is scheduled to be in the release of BSS 04. And then we've got little Mr. Cosmic's Good Morning Game, saved Pro Tour, saved, let's go. Big fan there. So overall, I think this is incredibly healthy for the game. I am, big ups to the Bandai team for kind of being very responsive to community feedback and pushing this, especially for the Pro Tour. I am so excited for the Pro Tour now because, oh my God, there's a world of possibilities in what we can bring there, and it'll be fresh and exciting. And honestly, I'm super jazzed for that. And the lore set's coming out. So how will the lore set have impact? For what it's worth, I think generally Toki 5 and Godslayer are like the biggest things on the radar. But hey, maybe someone comes up with some spicy build using the rest of the Emperor General stuff. But I think there's a lot of room. I think Pterosaur is still a viable deck, so be careful. Don't think aggro is dead. Aggro doesn't exist. No, Pterosaur can probably still be a pretty decent deck, so be aware of that. I think white control is still going to be okay. There are definitely slots you can fill in for the Axe Spider, and the deck works generally the same, especially now that there's no volcanic break, so that you can actually stick an elk much more reliably. But I think purple is going to be incredibly good, and I think that's something that we need to keep an eye out for. But hey, we still have Star Blaster on the format, so they can't go degenerate with a bunch of on summons, which is to the best. So with that said, guys, what do you guys think of the ban list? You guys think it's absolutely crazy or ridiculous? Let me know in the comments down below. And with that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Ciao.